Everyone wants to make their first earnings in Fortnite, and the solo victory cash cups are the way to do that. So I've collaborated with Kinch Analytics to provide you with a complete guide covering everything from where you should drop in your first game of the open round, all the way up to how to win a game and make $100 in the finals. So let's first start with the opens. You only have a 2-hour window to play out 7 games. However, from the moment you load into the first game until it ends, this can be up to 28 minutes long, meaning you can only really play out 5 full end games. However, on average, most people only play out 4 end games because if you really die at all in the mid game, you're not going to have enough time to queue into a 5th game. Thankfully, realistically, you only need 2 or 3 good end games to qualify to the finals. You'll see a lot of pro players going all out and W keying their first game to get as many elimination points as possible, and the 3 main drop slots they choose for this is Fencing Fields, Snooty Steps, and Reckless Railways. It's not a surprise that these drop spots offer mythic loot, along with a medallion for infinitely recharging shields, so good players prioritize landing here. These drop spots average 7 players landing here in your first game, however it can vary drastically. This game, for example, had 22 players landing at Snooty Steps. Generally, players looking to get a high elim first game will land the mythic POI to grab a medallion, fight anyone there, then push to the nearest other mythic POI to grab as many other medallions as possible. Forecast isn't as important since you're just trying to fight everyone you see, but the additional 15 points from Loot Island is a must grab. A 10 elim win with the island is already 55 points, which in some regions would almost already qualify you. If you're not a player who can consistently win the majority of their fights and win solo ranked games with the double-digit eliminations, it's best probably not to land in these areas as you'll more than likely die and just waste your game. Now, if I tell you exactly where to land, that spot will immediately become more crowded, but you should look to land somewhere more low-key with 7 or more chests and some metal. Then farm your brick and wood on your rotation. For whatever drop spot you do end up choosing, you should absolutely be prepared to fight there, so have a good drop map, or at minimum have a couple of good drops practiced in your rank games and really understand how to loot this place quickly and fight there if you need to. Since each victory royale is worth 30 points and each elim is only worth 1, the vast majority of players should only really take fights when you need to get refreshed on loot, or if you have a clear advantage or a good opportunity that's low risk. I'll get into which loadouts you should take much more in the final section of this video, but for the most part you'll want a pump shotgun, striker assault rifle, grapple blade, and then 2 forms of healing. Medkits aren't as much of a priority in the opens as these games don't often go to heal off, but they should be absolutely carried if you have a medallion. Since this map has a much smaller amount of chests, if you're in need of additional loot, you can go for the train, as this alone gives you 200 metal and a full inventory, or you can go for your combat cache. Since they no longer carry slurp juices or gold or purple items, they're much less contested this season, so they can be worth going for if you need additional heals and metal, but again, be prepared to fight here. Of course, you can also get additional points for capturing mid-game objectives, 3 for capturing a forecast tower and 15 for capturing Loot Island. But is this really worth it? Straight off the bat, if you're not a fairly confident fighter, it's not worth it because you will have to fight people for them. The forecast tower spawn rates are rather odd, with the far east spawn having a 100% spawn rate. However, this is the most difficult one to capture as players with mythics and medallions from Reckless Railway and Grand Glacier will most likely be the ones fighting for it. The easiest one to go for is the northwest spawn that's there in 67% of matches, as there's the least chance for medallion wielding player to contest it. It's absolutely not required to capture a forecast tower in order to qualify, as 61% of EU players qualified without capturing a single one. Obviously though, it is really useful to see where every single zone is, so if you have an opportunity to get it, it may be worth it. Loot Island is a bit more different though, as it's worth 15 points, which is half of a win. This attracts a lot more players to capture, so again, if you're not the best fighter or you don't have 6 medkits to tank Storm, it's probably not worth going for. 45% of EU qualifiers captured at least 1 island, so again, it's absolutely not a requirement to qualify either, as over half of people never got a single island, including me. The majority of people qualifying are only getting around 11 to 15 elims in total across all 7 of their games, and the majority of these are either from fighting players when contested or from endgame. So to say it again, it is absolutely not required to drop a high elimination game in your first match. It's even possible to qualify without getting a single elimination, as Horus FN did. He had a second, a third, and even managed to win a game without using a single weapon at all. I don't necessarily think this is the strategy that you should be attempting, however, it's just to emphasize the point that you don't need to be heavily focused on getting a ton of elims in order to qualify to the finals. One really common issue is timings of your games. Now, if you've died a lot and you only have one single game left, yet there's a ton of time for you to potentially queue, it's best to wait until the last 30 minutes of the tournament to play your final match. At this point, the good players will mostly be out of your point range, meaning you'll have an easier lobby filled with worse players. Now, if you go into a game with 20 minutes left, a huge amount of players will be griefing for Loot Island. This is because it spawns around 12 minutes into the game, so players will be looking to capture it for the 15 additional points and then leave so they can get an additional game in. The result of this usually means that moving zones will have way less players, so if you don't go for Loot Island, it's actually a much easier game to get a lot of placement points in. On the flip side, if you queue into a game with around 10 minutes left and you're close to or have already qualified, there's a likelihood that less players will be on Loot Island, making it easier to capture. This is because they don't necessarily need the 15 points. However, if you're more than 15 points away from qualifying and queue into a game with 10 minutes left, then it'll be the complete opposite. These players will more than likely need those additional 15 points to qualify, so a ton of them will be griefing for the island. Now, if you want to know how many points it is to qualify, you can see on screen right now how many it was in the first 2 sessions across all regions. However, the thing is, this varies week to week, and there's been a bug where the Loot Island points randomly don't count, which a lot of people have found very frustrating. Luckily, all of the stats in this video have been provided by and are partnered with Kinch Analytics.
Hello.
Who provides incredibly accurate point qualification estimates through Kinch Premium. This isn't just for solo cash cups, it's for every single tournament as well, including FNCS. Kinch Premium also provides mathematically calculated perfect pixel drop maps, that's hard to say, drop spot data to know exactly where the most underrated drop spots are with the best loot for every single tournament, and general advice on how to play each tournament, similar to this video as he's provided, as I already mentioned, a ton of the stats here. You can scan the QR code on screen or copy the link in the description or the pinned comment to sign up. It only costs $8 per month, and there's also a free trial for everyone who wants to try it for the first time. Okay, so now you've hopefully qualified to the finals, hypothetically, and all that stands between you and winning $100 sweet is, well, I mean, actually, unfortunately, quite a lot. For drop spots, most of the things I said earlier are still true in the finals. However, the major difference here is that the mythic spots with the medallions. Dropping one of these drop spots in the opens doesn't necessarily increase your chances of qualifying to the finals, given how many times you will die of spawn. However, in the finals, all you need is one good game. Unsurprisingly, a mythic and a medallion make it significantly easier to win a game. 50.6% of game winners had a medallion at the end of the 5th zone. Now, with on average 45 people being alive at this point, the average chance for any one player to win is around 2%. However, for players with medallions, it's more around 10%, so there's a significant benefit to either landing at one of these 5 drop spots or landing near them and then pushing in early to third party all the players there. This also gives you the advantage of not needing to hold any shields in your inventory, giving you more space to hold medkits, which in the current meta are critical for playing heal off. Now, this leads me nicely on to what the perfect loadout is for finals. 81.5% of winners were carrying the grapple blade, which is clearly the superior mobility item when compared to the flowberry, which only saw a 13.56% usage. In terms of shotguns, 75% of winners took the pump shotgun, whereas 24% took the auto shotgun and 1% took no shotgun at all. The auto shotgun was predominantly used on loadouts where no other weapons were carried, but the majority of winners prefer the playstyle of the hammer pump, and that's my general advice as well. For the secondary weapon, 60% took the striker AR, 8% took the nemesis assault rifle, and 32% opted for no secondary weapon at all. The striker is just infinitely more powerful than any spray weapon in the current loot pool, so this should not come as a surprise. Its insane fire rate is perfect for shredding damage on unaware players in endgame and getting you refreshed on materials. In general, 2 weapons, 2 heals, and 1 mobility item is the preferred loadout of winners regardless of season. However, there were winners who won games using no weapons at all. In this game, Cubus won a game by playing heal off with floppers that he fished in the mid game, but we'll come back to the heal off specifically later on. After looting your drop spot, your next thought may be to go for the forecast towers that spawn at the beginning of the 2nd zone. It's incredibly useful to know where every zone is going to pull, in particular when all that matters is winning the game, so surely it's worth it. Well, statistically, getting forecast triples your chances of winning the game, going from a 1.35% to a 4.16%. However, this is skewed a little bit as much better players are more likely to go for forecast. The reality is almost 90% of winners did not use forecast, so it's far from required, but of course it is extremely beneficial. Since Loot Island doesn't grant you any additional points, it's not necessarily worth fighting for, but it can often be free, meaning you can get additional loot. Or you can go up there to mod your weapon, use the rifts or launch pads for extra mobility, or to reharvest your materials, in particular your brick, because there is a ton in the surrounding area. And that is actually an absolutely critical part of winning cash cup games. Ensuring you have more materials than everyone else is one of the biggest factors in determining who wins the game. At the 5th zone, winners have roughly the same amount of materials as players who placed 2nd to 10th. However, once it gets to the 8th zone, you can really start to see a difference. Players who win games are significantly better at conserving materials in the mid-game. This trend also continues into the end game, but at the end of the 10th zone, winners have 33% more materials than players who place 2nd to 10th. That's why it's so critical to find positions in the mid-game where you can re-harvest your material, whether it's on large bricks or inside of buildings. Of course, the other alternative is getting eliminations to refresh your materials. On average, game winners have 5.56 elims. There are, of course, the odd anomalies where players like Peterbot can drop 37 or 39 elim wins, but for the most part, that's on the extreme end. The distribution of these elims is much what you'd expect. 21.72% of elims come in the early game, 26% in the mid game, and then 52.28% in the end game. This follows the trend that the vast majority of players are not aggressively W-keying these lobbies and are instead trying to play as much for endgame as possible and then looking for refreshes when they need more materials. There also were no trends of when the players started to look for their refreshes either. This more came down to individual circumstances. However, I'd recommend starting to look for an elim in the endgame more when you get to around 300 materials left, as you'll still have plenty of mats left to fight with. Currently, a huge percentage of games are going down to heal-offs. This is pretty boring, so I'm sure Epic Games will change this at some point, but medkits are an absolute must carry. 80% of game winners are carrying medkits at the end of the 5th zone, which should show you how prioritized they are by the best players in the world. On average, 41% of games will end before the final moving zone has closed. If all of the moving zones continue to pull far and don't pull back on themselves, then most of the players in the lobby will run out of materials before the final zone closes, meaning the games often won't end in a heal-off. However, that means that 59% of games are determined by who has the most white health in the lobby. Carrying 3 medkits will allow you to heal in Storm for an additional 30 seconds, which should win you the majority of heal-offs. However, there are 10% of matches where the heal-off lasts longer than 30 seconds. In this game, for example, the heal-off lasted 57 seconds. The player on height had 3 medkits and 7 floppers, and the only reason he lost was because earlier in the game he took a little bit of storm damage, meaning he died of storm sickness before the other player. It's incredibly important in these matches to take as close to 0 storm damage as possible in order to win. This is particularly true if you play in the Asia region, because over 2/3 of games ended more than 30 seconds after the final zone had closed, showing once again how good these guys are at playing the heal-off meta. This is one of the main reasons why carrying a medallion is so powerful in finals, as you no longer need to carry shields and you can just stack 6 medkits. Now you know everything that it takes to win $100 in a solo cash cup, and I wish you good luck. Like and subscribe, and of course don't forget about Kinch Premium as well, and click this video because it's really good.